My son is about to turn 5 this coming Thursday. And he brings me so much joy, it is sometimes overwhelming. His spontaneous hugs make my heart soar. His voice saying mama is like music to my ears most of the time. His smile and his sense of humor are so infectious, it makes me sparkle with delight. His face is so beautiful and peaceful when he sleeps. I could stay up all night staring at it. But I didn't always feel this way. My birth story is not particularly long or harrowing or scary like many I've heard, but it certainly was not what I had hoped, and it was not the most amazing experience of my life, as I've heard it described by some. The birth of my son was surprising, confusing, rushed, and very detached from sensation. I did not labor, and my son was born via cesarean, and so my experience of birth was quite literally numb. This was not what I had imagined. Breastfeeding did not come easily to me. My milk never came in, as I've heard it described, and my body never ended up producing enough milk for nursing to be a magical experience. My lack of milk production caused me intense stress and guilt, not to mention major conflict in my relationship to my husband as he valiantly tried to support my flip-flopping commitment to the work that it took to sustain what little milk I did produce. This is not what I had imagined. Upon the arrival of my son, my relationship with my husband suffered. We felt disconnected and at odds with each other. We both felt helpless and unable to support one another as new parents. We went into the operating room for my son's birth as a team, and we came out separately, fighting two very different battles that placed us on opposing sides. This was not what I had imagined. 1 week after my son was born, I remember a friend asking me if I was still crying every day, to which I replied, yes, I am. I was relieved to hear that this was normal. However, my weepiness endured much longer. For months after my son was born, I felt anxious, sad, disconnected, lonely, hopeless, and most troubling of all, very, very angry. This was the kind of angry that I had never experienced before. It was the kind of angry where sometimes I would daydream about picking up a baseball bat and taking it to a line of car windows and smashing them one by one because that was the only way that I might feel better. I felt trapped inside of a giant cobweb, and often I thought it might be better if I just got in the car and drove away because I had made a terrible mistake becoming a mother. I was failing motherhood. This was most certainly not what I had imagined. It took me 14 months, over a year, to begin entertaining the idea that perhaps my postpartum experience was not normal, whatever that is. I Googled postpartum depression over and over again, but I continually ruled out the possibility of it being my reality. I was what I now call a very high-functioning postpartum depressed mother. On the outside, even to people closest to me, I appeared to be fine, except for the usual sleep deprivation, which all parents sustain. In early photos of me and my son, I smiled widely. I frequently told people I loved being a mom. On the inside, I was devastated and deeply unhappy. I felt guilty and embarrassed for feeling that way, so I stuffed it away and I tried to ignore it. I was in such denial of my truthful experience that it grew and festered inside until I was so ashamed of myself that I became despondent and desperate. It wasn't until 16 months that I privately began to seek help. It wasn't until 18 months that I started to feel better and I became more successfully involved in parenting. It wasn't until 20 months, almost 2 years, that I sat down with my own husband and told him what I'd been going through. I will never forget the look on his face when I shared what was going on inside of me. It was a flash of recognition. Sharing the truth about the complex layers of shame and anger that I felt as a depressed new mom allowed me to start healing and to connect to my son in the way that I had been longing to do from the beginning. And connecting with my son is what now allows me to find so much pleasure in the messiness of motherhood. While the day-to-day desperation of postpartum depression has lifted, the impact my postpartum anxiety and depression is still rippling in my life these 5 years later. If I think about it a little too hard, I get weepy. I carry grief and disappointment and anger about it still. For a long while, I thought it had been released, but it's back. And the ripples of it feel so hard. It ripples everywhere. In my body, in my yet unfulfilled desire for another opportunity to be a mother to an infant, and in the remaining wounds that still exist in my relationship, which we thankfully and lovingly work on every day. However, sharing the truth is what allows for me to keep healing, to keep loving my family fiercely, and yes, even to find joy in the pain of it all.